Germany's COVID-19 infection rate has risen to a record high for the fifth day in a row. Deaths are also rising. As authorities warn that the healthcare system could be overwhelmed, thousands of people have gathered to celebrate the start of carnival season in Cologne. A carnival party in early 2020 became a super spreader event and led to Germany's first major cluster of coronavirus infections.
It's carnival season in Germany. That means packed crowds attending alcohol-laden parties and costume parades. It comes as the number of Germany's new COVID-19 cases hit a record high. Are the current pandemic restrictions in place easing concerns among the revelers?
It's bad what's happening, but we're outside. If you're celebrating inside, then there would be concern. But outside?
We're all vaccinated, and I think that we now have to continue and just try it out. Let's see what happens.
Not everyone can wait to see what happens. The newly elected parliament is facing its first major challenge, and the country's likely future chancellor is warning about the crisis.
Das Virus ist noch unter uns.
The virus is still here and is threatening the health of our citizens. So it's very important that we take all measures to protect their health. Even though the situation is different because so many are vaccinated, it's still not good. In particular because not enough citizens have been vaccinated so far.
For some politicians, he's not going far enough.
Mr. Scholz, I think that you, as the likely future chancellor, have finally faced up to this discussion, that you're finally saying something. But I have to tell you one thing, that was more of a description of the situation than a powerful political statement.
With Chancellor Angela Merkel's government in a caretaker role, the parties trying to form a new government presented a draft bill that was discussed in the German parliament. Fears are growing that the healthcare system could be overwhelmed. But some don't seem to be that concerned.
Let's go now to our political correspondent, Jared Reed. Hey there, Jared. Yet another day of record numbers. Why has this fourth wave grown so enormously?
Well, Michael, the numbers are very high. Just today, the fifth consecutive day of record high incidence rates. We've got 263 confirmed cases per 100,000 people over a 7-day period. And experts are saying this is really all down to the large numbers of unvaccinated people in Germany. Less than 70% of the population is fully vaccinated. And that means there are simply too many people who are refusing a vaccine despite having ready access to one. And we are seeing this play out in these high numbers. Hospital beds are filling up, ICUs are filling up. Some hospitals, like the Charité here in Berlin, this is Europe's largest university hospital, it's had to postpone the treatment and surgeries of non-COVID patients because it needs to reallocate those staff. And it's at the point where we're getting warnings, like from Christian Drosten, a leading virologist, this week. He's saying that Germany could see an extra 100,000 deaths. So very serious figures that we're talking about here.
We heard yesterday from Germany's likely next chancellor, Olaf Scholz. What's his plan?
Olaf Scholz is going to be meeting with the leaders of Germany's 16 states next week, and this meeting is going to be taking place just before national pandemic emergency legislation expires. And what's going to replace that is legislation being put forward by Olaf Scholz and the parties he's trying to form a government with to give states a bunch of options to choose from in managing the pandemic. They include things like bringing back free rapid testing, compulsory testing for healthcare workers, more funding for vaccine centres, opening vaccine centres, reopening them across the country. He is in favour, too, of what's called 2G. This is when certain access to certain facilities are restricted to only the vaccinated or recovered people. One thing that's not on the table, even though there's been a big debate about this in Germany, is mandatory vaccines. That's not being considered.
You know, obviously, we're heading into the Christmas season. Much as Germans may not want to imagine this, could we see lockdowns then?
Well, as we saw in that report of people hugging each other and dancing around in Carnival, I guess the public appetite for lockdowns is very, very small. And that's something that these parties who are trying to form Germany's next government also want to avoid. But we've had a call today from the German Hotel and Restaurant Association. They are calling on politicians to explicitly rule lockdowns out. They are saying that their members, so hotels, restaurants, small businesses, wouldn't be able to survive mentally and emotionally, and I guess financially to a large extent, another lockdown. I just, you know, as these numbers do get worse, we really have to wait and see what happens there.
Jared, based on what you're hearing, how much is this weighing on Germany's newly elected leaders who are still in the midst of trying to form a new coalition government?
They are under pressure. Germany is, I guess, in somewhat of a little bit of a political limbo right now, where we have a caretaker government in place and three parties trying to form a new government. They are under pressure to do something about COVID-19, but at the same time, there are other issues on the table too, like the situation in Belarus on the Belarusian-Polish border. So all of these issues are kind of coming at the same time, an inopportune time as these talks continue to form a coalition.
That's a political correspondent, Jared Reed. As always, Jared, many, many thanks. Coronavirus infections are surging to new highs in several European countries. Austria is among those reaching new records in the number of daily reported cases. The country's Chancellor, Alexander Schallenberg, says placing unvaccinated people under a lockdown looks unavoidable. Now, Upper Austria, the country's third largest state, has announced plans to introduce the targeted lockdown starting Monday.
These streets in the city of Linz in Upper Austria may soon look even emptier. The state is currently one of the most affected by the coronavirus and has the lowest vaccination rate in the country. Local authorities plan to introduce a lockdown for the unvaccinated already next week, if they get the go-ahead from the federal government.
We don't want to wait and have to impose strict measures again, so that the things most important to us remain possible, like open schools, childcare options, and as normal a life as possible for those who've been vaccinated.
With a lockdown, the unvaccinated could only leave the house for essential reasons, like going to work or buying food. Opinions differ on whether a so-called lockdown for the unvaccinated is necessary.
Anyone who doesn't get vaccinated is stupid. There are a lot of idiots in Upper Austria. We're the only state with such high numbers.
I personally know some people who are skeptical of the shots. They are simply afraid. I don't think you can force anyone. A lockdown is already a very tough measure. But the lockdown could also be applied to the whole of Austria. Chancellor Alexander Schallenberg said it could be a question of days before a national lockdown for the unvaccinated becomes unavoidable. Austria has the lowest vaccination rates in Western Europe, with 65% of the population fully vaccinated. It stands out with two other German-speaking countries, Germany and Switzerland, for their relatively low vaccine uptake. Authorities hope this lockdown might change that and help lift the country out of this new coronavirus wave ahead of the holidays.
Now to some of the other developments in the coronavirus pandemic. Europe's drug regulator is recommending the authorization of 2 COVID-19 antibody therapies as the region seeks to build up its defense against rising cases. Japan says it's adding thousands more hospital beds in preparation for a new virus surge. Last summer, many patients were forced to stay at home. Well, they may be a few days late, but a German and 3 U.S. astronauts have arrived safely at the International Space Station.